often we hear that we should follow our dreams or shoot for the stars and create big goals. But how do we actually accomplish that? We know we need to do something, but we might not even know where to begin. Not to mention there's so much pressure to have it all figured out when there's so much about the future that's simply unknown. So rather than standing here frozen in fear, how do we get started and take action? By embracing the power of prototyping. In the world of design thinking and life design, prototypes are simply opportunities to try something out, test an idea, or explore a curiosity. These small steps can actually lead to big goals. And today, I want to share with you how the power of prototyping has worked in my own life. Today, I am the Executive Director of the Radbill Center for College and Life Design here at BGSU. But back when I was in college, I had no way of knowing that this is where I would end up someday. I was a graphic design major with a marketing minor who loved dance and theater. I was, and still am, what is sometimes referred to as a multi-potentialite. This term was coined by Emily Wapnick to describe someone who has lots of interests and is looking for ways to connect those interests rather than just choose one path. As I was approaching graduation, I really struggled. I was overwhelmed by the idea of finding the perfect job or picking the right career path. The pressure was real. As we all know, the most popular question asked of any college senior, so what are you going to do after graduation? And even though I loved my field of study, it was still an incredibly overwhelming time as I stepped out of the known sequence of traditional American schooling and into the real world. When I graduated, I took a job as a part-time administrative assistant for an arts living learning community on campus. It was outside of the expected path of my major, but it was a new initiative and it seemed really interesting. In that first job, I quickly realized that I loved being part of building something new, but I still had bills to pay. So the countdown was on to work my way to a full-time position or move on. So I started paying attention to opportunities, no matter how small. A freelance graphic design project, a graduate class that was free for employees, attending workshops to learn about other parts of campus, etc. As it turns out, I was designing my career one step at a time. And over the next decade, I worked my way up to being director of that same department. But back when I started that first job, I was asked by a faculty member, "Don't you have bigger ambitions?" And I remember feeling like I had somehow fallen short of his expectations. That's when I learned to never say that to a student or recent grad. Thankfully, I saw that faculty member at a conference a few years ago, and he admitted that I had made a pretty good career out of that initial prototype working in higher education. In design thinking, a prototype is when you take an idea and turn it into something tangible, with the goal to maximize learning for minimum investment, as described by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans from Stanford University. They're also the authors of the book, Designing Your Life. When designers create a prototype, they are using the resources available to them to outline the basic concept of a product or an idea. So remember how I said I had been interested in theater? Well, my campus job as a student was in the costume shop, and we did a lot of prototyping there. For one production, the director asked me to build a woolly mammoth costume. Yes, there was a character in the play that was a woolly mammoth. But where would I start? There was no instruction manual for how to build a woolly mammoth costume. The internet wasn't nearly as robust at the time, and YouTube didn't even exist yet. So the only way forward was, well, to try it. So a faculty member helped me create the head with paper mache, and we used dryer vents and wire and fake fur, and we just kept working through it until, lo and behold, the character on stage looked pretty much like a woolly mammoth. In life design, we talk a lot about prototyping too. But instead of turning an idea into a product or a woolly mammoth, we are talking about the ways you might pursue a curiosity or explore an interest in your own life. When I first learned about life design, I remember Bill Burnett and Dave Evans talking about how life designers pay attention to opportunities. And at that moment, it clicked. That's what I had been doing all along. I had always been a curious person, and one small opportunity often led to a new curiosity, and so on and so on. It's kind of like that trade-up game, you know, where you start with a paperclip, and then you might trade it for a hair tie, then maybe you trade that for a piece of candy, and on it goes until you've somehow managed to end up with a bicycle. In my case, over the course of my career, some really small steps have ended up leading me to pretty big goals. I mentioned earlier that I'm now an executive director of a donor-funded center leading a bold vision to transform the student experience through life design. But what you don't know is that the path that led me here actually starts with a job I didn't get about 6 years ago. I was still working at the university I had graduated from, and I had applied for a leadership role in marketing and communications. I was a finalist, but ultimately I wasn't offered the position. So I was trying to figure out what the next step in my career might be. My boss at the time suggested that I check out a workshop at Stanford called Designing Your Life. So I went, and I discovered that I had an incredible interest in helping students to feel more confident about their futures. Then the opportunity arose to design and teach a mini course using that framework of life design. And I said yes. Then the folks at Stanford encouraged participants to share their prototypes with each other. And I said yes. 2 years later, I was asked to come back to that same workshop, but this time as part of the facilitation team. And I said yes. 2 years after that, I learned that BGSU was seeking to hire an executive director for life design. And I said yes to having a conversation to learn more about the role. And 1 year ago, I made the leap to a new university and a new job with much bigger responsibilities and opportunities, all because I said yes to that workshop back in 2017 that led me in a direction I could never have predicted. I recently lost a close friend and colleague after a long battle with cancer. Anne wrote her own obituary, where she described her say yes mentality toward life, and that perfectly describes how I remember her. Anne viewed life as one big adventure, and she managed to accomplish some really incredible personal and professional goals in her lifetime. She traveled around the world, she hiked to see gorillas, she became a full professor, she was published in a national magazine, the list goes on. But even more than her own accomplishments, she always took the time to encourage others to say yes to opportunities. In fact, she was one of my biggest cheerleaders when I was considering, and then ultimately took that big career leap. Now I lead a team whose entire job is to help students access those types of opportunities and build the confidence to design their own paths. Life can be overwhelming, especially at the beginning and end of college. You might feel like you should have a foolproof plan, that decisions already need to be made that impact the rest of your life, that you need to be perfectly sure that you are on the right path to success. But here's the secret. Life is a journey, and even if you think you have it all figured out, there are going to be unexpected twists and turns along the way. I still don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. Martin Luther King Jr. is quoted as saying, "You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step." My own variation on that quote is something I tell friends and students frequently. You don't need to have it all figured out right now, but you do need to choose the next step. Take a moment to think about something you might want to pursue. What is one small thing that you could do today, tomorrow, or this week to explore that curiosity? For example, if you think you might want to live and work in France someday, what's the first thing you do? You could quit school, sell everything you own, buy a one-way ticket to Paris and hope for the best. Or you could start by talking to someone who's lived in France, or by exploring short-term study abroad opportunities, or even just downloading an app to help you learn some basic French phrases. In life design, prototyping is often as simple as a conversation or an experience. The great thing about prototyping, the stakes can be pretty small. If it works out well, then great, move on to the next step. But what if it's a disaster? What if you discover you hate it? Well, then you learn from the experience, adjust as needed, and most importantly, thank yourself for figuring it out sooner than later. The design thinking process is iterative, where you test out ideas and you're constantly learning something new along the way. In short, I am simply encouraging you to take action and embrace the process, because you never know where one conversation or experience might lead you. For example, I had a student named Jenny, and she used LinkedIn to reach out and send a message to an alum living in Chicago, which is where she wanted to live after graduation. That alum connected her to a friend of theirs who worked in marketing, which was Jenny's area of interest. And now Jenny is living in Chicago and working at LinkedIn, supporting other businesses to recruit new employees, doing it all through LinkedIn, of course. It is my mission to ensure that every student has access to these types of opportunities, to help you build a team that can support you along the way, to encourage you to get curious and take action, to empower you to take those first small steps toward bigger goals. Now, I've talked a lot about what students can do, but what can we do as educators, employers, or mentors? Take the advice of my friend Anne and say yes to providing professional development opportunities, to job shadowing, to requests for informational interviews. Say yes to sharing your story, including the twists and turns you encountered along the way. And whether you're a student now or you graduated decades ago, you can still be a lifelong learner, because it's never too late to try something new. So what's one small action you can take today to move you one step closer to your goals? Thank you.